Section 5 of Letters of Pliny by Pliny the Younger, translated by William Melmoth, revised by F.C.T. Bosanquet. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Andrew Coleman. Letters 26 to 31. Letter 26. To Calvisius. I never, I think, spent any time more agreeably than my time lately with Spurinna. So agreeably indeed, that if ever I should arrive at old age, there is no man whom I would sooner choose for my model; for nothing can be more perfect in arrangement than his mode of life. I look upon order in human actions, especially at that advanced age, with the same sort of pleasure as I behold the settled course of the heavenly bodies. In young men, indeed, a little confusion and disarrangement is all well enough; but in age, when business is unseasonable, and ambition indecent, all should be composed and uniform. This rule Spurinna observes with most religious consistency. Even in those matters which one might call insignificant, were they not of everyday occurrence, he observes a certain periodical season and method. The early morning he passes on his couch; at 8 he calls for his slippers and walks 3 miles, exercising mind and body together. On his return, if he has any friends in the house with him, he gets upon some entertaining and interesting topic of conversation; if by himself, some book is read to him, sometimes when visitors are there even, if agreeable to the company. Then he has a rest, and after that either takes up a book or resumes his conversation in preference to reading. By and by he goes out for a drive in his carriage, either with his wife, a most admirable woman, or with some friend, a happiness which lately was mine. How agreeable, how delightful it is getting a quiet time alone with him in this way! You could imagine you were listening to some worthy of ancient times. What deeds, what men you hear about, and with what noble precepts you are imbued, yet all delivered with so modest an air, that there is not the least appearance of dictating. When he has gone about 7 miles, he gets out of his chariot and walks a mile more, after which he returns home, and either takes a rest or goes back to his couch and writing; for he composes most elegant lyrics, both in Greek and Latin, so wonderfully soft, sweet, and gay they are, while the author's own unsullied life lends them additional charm. When the baths are ready, which in winter is about 3 o'clock, and in summer about 2, he undresses himself, and, if there happen to be no wind, walks for some time in the sun. After this he has a good brisk game of tennis; for by this sort of exercise too he combats the effects of old age. When he has bathed, he throws himself upon his couch, but waits a little before he begins eating, and in the meanwhile has some light and entertaining author read to him. In this, as in all the rest, his friends are at full liberty to share, or to employ themselves in any other way, just as they prefer. You sit down to an elegant dinner, without extravagant display, which is served up in antique plate of pure silver. He has another complete service in Corinthian metal, which, though he admires as a curiosity, is far from being his passion. During dinner he is frequently entertained with the recital of some dramatic piece, by way of seasoning his very pleasures with study; and although he continues at the table, even in summer, till the night is somewhat advanced, yet he prolongs the entertainment with so much affability and politeness that none of his guests ever finds it tedious. By this method of living he has preserved all his senses entire, and his body vigorous and active to his 78th year, without showing any sign of old age, except wisdom. This is the sort of life I ardently aspire after, as I purpose enjoying it when I shall arrive at those years which will justify a retreat from active life. Meanwhile I am embarrassed with 1,000 affairs, in which Spurinna is at once my support and my example; for he too, so long as it became him, discharged his professional duties, held magistracies, governed provinces, and by toiling hard earned the repose he now enjoys. I propose to myself the same career and the same limits, and I here give it to you under my hand that I do so. If an ill-timed ambition should carry me beyond those bounds, produce this very letter of mine in court against me, and condemn me to repose, whenever I enjoy it, without being reproached with indolence. Farewell. XXVII. To Baebius Macer. It gives me great pleasure to find you such a reader of my uncle's works as to wish to have a complete collection of them, and to ask me for the names of them all. I will act as index then, and you shall know the very order in which they were written, for the studious reader likes to know this. The first work of his was a treatise in 1 volume, on the use of the dart by cavalry. This he wrote when in command of one of the cavalry corps of our allied troops, and is drawn up with great care and ingenuity. The Life of Pomponius Secundus, in 2 volumes. Pomponius had a great affection for him, and he thought he owed this tribute to his memory. The history of the wars in Germany, in 20 books, in which he gave an account of all the battles we were engaged in against that nation. A dream he had, while serving in the army in Germany, first suggested the design of this work to him. He imagined that Drusus Nero, who extended his conquest very far into that country, and there lost his life, appeared to him in his sleep, and entreated him to rescue his memory from oblivion. Next comes a work entitled The Student, in 3 parts, which from their length spread into 6 volumes, a work in which is discussed the earliest training and subsequent education of the orator. Questions of Grammar and Style, in 8 books, written in the latter part of Nero's reign, when the tyranny of the times made it dangerous to engage in literary pursuits requiring freedom and elevation of tone. He has completed the history which Aufidius Bassus left unfinished, and has added to it 30 books. And lastly, he has left 37 books on natural history, a work of great compass and learning, and as full of variety as nature herself. You will wonder how a man as busy as he was could find time to compose so many books, and some of them too involving such care and labour. But you will be still more surprised when you hear that he pleaded at the bar for some time, that he died in his 66th year, that the intervening time was employed partly in the execution of the highest official duties, partly in attendance upon those emperors who honoured him with their friendship. But he had a quick apprehension, marvellous power of application, and was of an exceedingly wakeful temperament. He always began to study at midnight, at the time of the feast of Vulcan, not for the sake of good luck, but for learning's sake; in winter generally at 1 in the morning, but never later than 2, and often at 12. He was a most ready sleeper, insomuch that he would sometimes, whilst in the midst of his studies, fall off and then wake up again. Before daybreak he used to wait upon Vespasian, who also used his nights for transacting business in, and then proceed to execute the orders he had received. As soon as he returned home he gave what time was left to study. After a short and light refreshment at noon, agreeably to the good old custom of our ancestors, he would frequently in the summer, if he was disengaged from business, lie down and bask in the sun, during which time some author was read to him, while he took notes and made extracts. For every book he read he made extracts out of. Indeed, it was a maxim of his, that no book was so bad but some good might be got out of it. When this was over, he generally took a cold bath, then some light refreshment, and a little nap. After this, as if it had been a new day, he studied till supper time, when a book was again read to him, which he would take down running notes upon. I remember once, his reader having mispronounced a word, one of my uncle's friends at the table made him go back to where the word was and repeat it again, upon which my uncle said to his friend, "Surely you understood it?" Upon his acknowledging that he did, "Why then," said he, "did you make him go back again? We have lost more than 10 lines by this interruption." Such an economist he was of time. In the summer he used to rise from supper at daylight, and in winter as soon as it was dark, a rule he observed as strictly as if it had been a law of the state. Such was his manner of life amid the bustle and turmoil of the town. But in the country his whole time was devoted to study, excepting only when he bathed. In this exception I include no more than the time during which he was actually in the bath, for all the while he was being rubbed and wiped he was employed either in hearing some book read to him, or in dictating himself. In going about anywhere, as though he were disengaged from all other business, he applied his mind wholly to that single pursuit. A shorthand writer constantly attended him, with book and tablets, who, in the winter, wore a particular sort of warm gloves, that the sharpness of the winter might not occasion any interruption to my uncle's studies; and for the same reason, when in Rome, he was always carried in a chair. I recollect his once taking me to task for walking. "You need not," he said, "lose these hours," for he thought every hour gone that was not given to study. Through this extraordinary application he found time to compose the several treatises I have mentioned, besides 160 volumes of extracts which he left me in his will, consisting of a kind of commonplace, written on both sides in very small hand, so that one might fairly reckon the number considerably more. He used himself to tell us, that when he was comptroller of the revenue in Spain, he could have sold these manuscripts to Largius Licinus for 400,000 sesterces, and then there were not so many of them. When you consider the books he has read, and the volumes he has written, are you not inclined to suspect that he never was engaged in public duties, or was ever in the confidence of his prince? On the other hand, when you are told how indefatigable he was in his studies, are you not inclined to wonder that he read and wrote no more than he did? For, on one side, what obstacles would not the business of a court throw in his way? And on the other, what is it that such intense application might not effect? It amuses me then when I hear myself called a studious man, who in comparison with him am the merest idler. But why do I mention myself, who am diverted from these pursuits by numberless affairs both public and private? Who amongst those whose whole lives are devoted to literary pursuits would not blush and feel himself the most confirmed of sluggards by the side of him? I see I have run out my letter further than I had originally intended, which was only to let you know, as you asked me, what works he had left behind him. But I trust this will be no less acceptable to you than the books themselves, as it may, possibly, not only excite your curiosity to read his works, but also your emulation to copy his example, by some attempts of a similar nature. Farewell. XXVIII To Annius Severus. I have lately purchased with the legacy that was left me a small statue of Corinthian brass. It is small indeed, but elegant and lifelike, as far as I can form any judgment, which most certainly in matters of this sort, as perhaps in all others, is extremely defective. However, I do see the beauties of this figure; for as it is naked, the faults, if there be any, as well as the perfections, are the more observable. It represents an old man in an erect attitude. The bones, muscles, veins, and the very wrinkles give the impression of breathing life. The hair is thin and failing, the forehead broad, the face shrivelled, the throat lank, the arms loose and hanging, the breast shrunken, and the belly fallen in, as the whole turn and air of the figure behind too is equally expressive of old age. It appears to be true antique, judging from the colour of the brass. In short, it is such a masterpiece as would strike the eyes of a connoisseur, and which cannot fail to charm an ordinary observer; and this induced me, who am an absolute novice in this art, to buy it. But I did so, not with any intention of placing it in my own house, for I have nothing of the kind there, but with the design of fixing it in some conspicuous place in my native province. I should like it best in the temple of Jupiter, for it is a gift well worthy of a temple, well worthy of a god. I desire therefore you would, with that care with which you always perform my requests, undertake this commission, and give immediate orders for a pedestal to be made for it, out of what marble you please, but let my name be engraved upon it, and, if you think proper to add these as well, my titles. I will send the statue by the first person I can find who will not mind the trouble of it; or possibly, which I'm sure you will like better, I may myself bring it along with me; for I intend, if business can spare me, that is to say, to make an excursion over to you. I see joy in your looks when I promise to come, but you will soon change your countenance when I add, only for a few days; for the same business that at present keeps me here will prevent my making a longer stay. Farewell. XXIX. To Caninius Rufus. I have just been informed that Silius Italicus has starved himself to death at his villa near Naples. Ill health was the cause. Being troubled with an incurable cancerous tumour, he grew weary of life, and therefore put an end to it, with a determination not to be moved. He had been extremely fortunate all through his life, with the exception of the death of the younger of his two sons. However, he has left behind him the elder and the worthier man of the two in a position of distinction, having even attained consular rank. His reputation had suffered a little in Nero's time, as he was suspected of having officiously joined in some of the informations in that reign; but he used his interest with Vitellius with great discretion and humanity. He acquired considerable honour by his administration of the government of Asia, and, by his good conduct after his retirement from business, cleared his character from that stain which his former public exertions had thrown upon it. He lived as a private nobleman, without power, and consequently without envy. Though he was frequently confined to his bed, and always to his room, yet he was highly respected, and much visited, not with an interested view, but on his own account. He employed his time between conversing with literary men and composing verses, which he sometimes read out by way of testing the public opinion, but they evidence more industry than genius. In the decline of his years he entirely quitted Rome and lived altogether in Campania, from whence even the accession of the new emperor could not draw him; a circumstance which I mention as much to the honour of Caesar, who was not displeased with that liberty, as of Italicus, who was not afraid to make use of it. He was reproached with indulging his taste for the fine arts at an immoderate expense. He had several villas in the same province, and the last purchase was always the especial favourite, to the neglect of all the rest. These residences overflowed with books, statues, and pictures, which he more than enjoyed, he even adored, particularly that of Virgil, of whom he was so passionate an admirer that he celebrated the anniversary of that poet's birthday with more solemnity than his own, at Naples especially, where he used to approach his tomb as if it had been a temple. In this tranquillity he passed his 75th year, with a delicate rather than an infirm constitution. As he was the last person upon whom Nero conferred the consular office, so he was the last survivor of all those who have been raised by him to that dignity. It is also remarkable that, as he was the last to die of Nero's consuls, so Nero died when he was consul. Recollecting this, a feeling of pity for the transitory condition of mankind comes over me. Is there anything in nature so short and limited as human life, even at its longest? Does it not seem to you but yesterday that Nero was alive? And yet not one of all those who were consuls in his reign now remains. Though why should I wonder at this? Lucius Piso, the father of that Piso who was so infamously assassinated by Valerius Festus in Africa, used to say he did not see one person in the senate whose opinion he had consulted when he was consul. In so short a space is the very term of life of such a multitude of beings comprised; so that to me those royal tears seem not only worthy of pardon, but of praise. For it is said that Xerxes, on surveying his immense army, wept at the reflection that so many thousand lives would, in such a short space of time, be extinct. The more ardent, therefore, should be our zeal to lengthen out this frail and transient portion of existence, if not by our deeds, for the opportunities of this are not in our power, yet certainly by our literary accomplishments. And since long life is denied us, let us transmit to posterity some memorial that we have at least lived. I well know you need no incitements, but the warmth of my affection for you inclines me to urge you on in the course you are already pursuing, just as you have so often urged me. Happy rivalry, when two friends strive in this way which of them shall animate the other most in their mutual pursuit of immortal fame. Farewell. Letter XXX. To Spurinna and Cottia. I did not tell you, when I paid you my last visit, that I had composed something in praise of your son; because, in the first place, I wrote it not for the sake of talking about my performance, but simply to satisfy my affection, to console my sorrow for the loss of him. Again, as you told me, my dear Spurinna, that you had heard I had been reciting a piece of mine, I imagined you had also heard at the same time what was the subject of the recital; and besides, I was afraid of casting a gloom over your cheerfulness in that festive season, by reviving the remembrance of that heavy sorrow. And even now I have hesitated a little whether I should gratify you both, in your joint request, by sending only what I recited, or add to it what I am thinking of keeping back for another essay. It does not satisfy my feelings to devote only one little tract to a memory so dear and sacred to me, and it seemed also more to the interest of his fame to have it thus disseminated by separate pieces. But the consideration that it would be more open and friendly to send you the whole now, rather than keep back some of it to another time, has determined me to do the former, especially as I have your promise that it shall not be communicated by either of you to any one else until I shall think proper to publish it. The only remaining favour I ask is, that you will give me a proof of the same unreserve by pointing out to me what you shall judge would be best altered, omitted, or added. It is difficult for a mind in affliction to concentrate itself upon such little cares. However, as you would direct a painter or sculptor who was representing the figure of your son what parts he should retouch or express, so I hope you will guide and inform my hand in this more durable, or, as you are pleased to think it, this immortal likeness, which I am endeavouring to execute; for the truer to the original, the more perfect and finished it is, so much the more lasting it is likely to prove. Farewell. Letter XXXI. To Julius Genitor. It is just like the generous disposition of Artemidorus to magnify the kindnesses of his friends. Hence he praises my deserts, though he is really indebted to me, beyond their due. It is true indeed that when the philosophers were expelled from Rome, I visited him at his house near the city, and ran the greater risk in paying him that civility, as it was more noticeable then, I being praetor at the time. I supplied him too with a considerable sum to pay certain debts he had contracted upon very honourable occasions, without charging interest, though obliged to borrow the money myself, while the rest of his rich powerful friends stood by hesitating about giving him assistance. I did this at a time when 7 of my friends were either executed or banished, Senecio, Rusticus, and Helvidius having just been put to death, while Mauricus, Gratilla, Arria, and Fannia were sent into exile, and scorched as it were by so many lightning bolts of the state thus hurled and flashing round me, I augured by no uncertain tokens my own impending doom. But I do not look upon myself, on that account, as deserving of the high praises my friend bestows upon me. All I pretend to is the being clear of the infamous guilt of abandoning him in his misfortunes. I had, as far as the differences between our ages would admit, a friendship for his father-in-law Musonius, whom I both loved and esteemed, while Artemidorus himself I entered into the closest intimacy with when I was serving as a military tribune in Syria, and I consider as a proof that there is some good in me the fact of my being so early capable of appreciating a man who is either a philosopher or the nearest resemblance to one possible; for I am sure that, amongst all those who at the present day call themselves philosophers, you will find hardly any one of them so full of sincerity and truth as he. I forbear to mention how patient he is of heat and cold alike, how indefatigable in labour, how abstemious in his food, and what an absolute restraint he puts upon all his appetites. For these qualities, considerable as they would certainly be in any other character, are less noticeable by the side of the rest of those virtues of his which recommended him to Musonius for a son-in-law, in preference to so many others of all ranks who paid their addresses to his daughter. And when I think of all these things, I cannot help feeling pleasurably affected by those unqualified terms of praise in which he speaks of me to you as well as to every one else. I am only apprehensive lest the warmth of his kind feeling carry him beyond the due limits, for he, who is so free from all other errors, is apt to fall into just this one good-natured one, of overrating the merits of his friends. Farewell. End of section 5. Section 6 of Letters of Pliny by Pliny the Younger, translated by William Melmoth, revised by F.C.T. Bosanquet. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Andrew Coleman. Letters 32 to 39. Letter 32. To Catilius Severus. I will come to supper, but must make this agreement beforehand, that I go when I please, that you treat me to nothing expensive, and that our conversation abound only in Socratic discourse, while even that in moderation. There are certain necessary visits of ceremony, bringing people out before daylight, which Cato himself could not safely fall in with; though I must confess that Julius Caesar reproaches him with that circumstance in such a manner as redounds to his praise; for he tells us, that the persons who met him reeling home blushed at the discovery, and adds, "You would have thought that Cato had detected them, and not they Cato." Could he place the dignity of Cato in a stronger light than by representing him thus venerable even in his cups? But let our supper be as moderate in regard to ours as in the preparation and expense; for we are not of such eminent reputation that even our enemies cannot censure our conduct without applauding it at the same time. Farewell. Letter 33. To Achilles. The atrocious treatment that Largius Macedo, a man of praetorian rank, lately received at the hands of his slaves, is so extremely tragical, that it deserves a place rather in public history than in a private letter; though it must at the same time be acknowledged there was a haughtiness and severity in his behaviour towards them which showed that he little remembered, indeed almost entirely forgot, the fact that his own father had once been in that station of life. He was bathing at his Formian villa, when he found himself suddenly surrounded by his slaves. One seizes him by the throat, another strikes him on the mouth, whilst others trampled upon his breast, stomach, and even other parts which I need not mention. When they thought the breath must be quite out of his body, they threw him down upon the heated pavement of the bath, to try whether he was still alive, where he lay outstretched and motionless, either really insensible, or only feigning to be so; upon which they concluded him to be actually dead. In this condition they brought him out, pretending that he had got suffocated by the heat of the bath. Some of his more trusty servants received him, and his mistresses came about him shrieking and lamenting. The noise of their cries and the fresh air together brought him a little to himself; he opened his eyes, moved his body, and showed them, as he now safely might, that he was not quite dead. The murderers immediately made their escape, but most of them have been caught again, and they are after the rest. He was with great difficulty kept alive for a few days, and then expired, having however the satisfaction of finding himself as amply revenged in his lifetime as he would have been after his death. Thus you see to what affronts, indignities, and dangers we are exposed. Lenity and kind treatment are no safeguard, for it is malice, and not reflection, that arms such ruffians against their masters. So much for this piece of news. And what else? What else? Nothing else, or you should hear it, for I have still paper, and time too, as it is holiday time with me, to spare for more; and I can tell you one further circumstance relating to Macado, which now occurs to me. As he was in a public bath once, at Rome, a remarkable, and, judging from the manner of his death, an ominous accident happened to him. A slave of his, in order to make way for his master, laid his hand gently upon a Roman knight, who, turning suddenly round, struck, not the slave who had touched him, but Macado, so violent a blow with his open palm that he almost knocked him down. Thus the bath, by a kind of gradation, proved fatal to him, being first the scene of an indignity he suffered, afterwards the scene of his death. Farewell. XXXIV To Nepos. I have constantly observed that amongst the deeds and sayings of illustrious persons of either sex, some have made more noise in the world, whilst others have been really greater, although less talked about; and I am confirmed in this opinion by a conversation I had yesterday with Fannia. This lady is a granddaughter to that celebrated Arria, who animated her husband to meet death by her own glorious example. She informed me of several particulars relating to Arria, no less heroic than this applauded action of hers, though taken less notice of; and I think you will be as surprised to read the account of them as I was to hear it. Her husband, Caecina Paetus, and her son were both attacked at the same time with a fatal illness, as was supposed; of which the son died, a youth of remarkable beauty, and as modest as he was comely, endeared indeed to his parents no less by his many graces than from the fact of his being their son. His mother prepared his funeral, and conducted the usual ceremonies so privately that Paetus did not know of his death. Whenever she came into his room, she pretended her son was alive, and actually better, and as often as he enquired after his health, would answer, "He has had a good rest, and eaten his food with quite an appetite." Then, when she found the tears she had so long kept back, gushing forth in spite of herself, she would leave the room, and having given vent to her grief, return with dry eyes and a serene countenance, as though she had dismissed every feeling of bereavement at the door of her husband's chamber. I must confess it was a brave action in her to draw the steel, plunge it into her breast, pluck out the dagger, and present it to her husband with that ever memorable, I had almost said that divine, expression, "Paetus, it is not painful." But when she spoke and acted thus, she had the prospect of glory and immortality before her: how far greater, without the support of any such animating motives, to hide her tears, to conceal her grief, and cheerfully to act the mother, when a mother no more. Scribonianus had taken up arms in Illyria against Claudius, where he lost his life, and Paetus, who was of his party, was brought a prisoner to Rome. When they were going to put him on board ship, Arria besought the soldiers that she might be permitted to attend him; "for surely," she urged, "you will allow a man of consular rank some servants to dress him, attend to him at meals, and put his shoes on for him; but if you will take me, I alone will perform all these offices." Her request was refused, upon which she hired a fishing boat, and in that small vessel followed the ship. On her return to Rome, meeting the wife of Scribonianus in the emperor's palace, at the time when this woman voluntarily gave evidence against the conspirators, "What!" she exclaimed, "shall I hear you even speak to me, you on whose bosom your husband Scribonianus was murdered, and yet you survive him?" An expression which plainly shows that the noble manner in which she put an end to her life was no unpremeditated effect of sudden passion. Moreover, when Thrasea, her son-in-law, was endeavouring to dissuade her from her purpose of destroying herself, and amongst other arguments which he used, said to her, "Would you then advise your daughter to die with me, if my life were to be taken from me?" "Most certainly I would," she replied, "if she had lived as long, and in as much harmony with you, as I have with my Paetus." This answer greatly increased the alarm of her family, and made them watch her for the future more narrowly; which when she perceived, "It is of no use," she said, "you may oblige me to effect my death in a more painful way, but it is impossible you should prevent it." Saying this, she sprang from her chair, and running her head with the utmost violence against the wall, fell down, to all appearance dead. But being brought to herself again, "I told you," she said, "if you would not suffer me to take an easy path to death, I should find a way to it, however hard." Now is there not, my friend, something much greater in all this, than in the so much talked of "Paetus, it is not painful," to which these led the way, and yet this last is the favourite topic of fame, while all the former are passed over in silence; whence I cannot but infer, what I observed at the beginning of my letter, that some actions are more celebrated, whilst others are really greater. XXXV To Severus. I was obliged by my consular office to compliment the emperor in the name of the republic; but after I had performed that ceremony in the senate in the usual manner, and as fully as the time and place would allow, I thought it agreeable to the affection of a good subject to enlarge those general heads, and expand them into a complete discourse. My principal object in doing so was, to confirm the emperor in his virtues, by paying them that tribute of applause which they so justly deserve, and at the same time to direct future princes, not in the formal way of lecture, but by his more engaging example, to those paths they must pursue if they would attain the same heights of glory. To instruct princes how to form their conduct is a noble but difficult task, and may perhaps be esteemed an act of presumption; but to applaud the character of an accomplished prince, and to hold out to posterity by this means a beacon light, as it were, to guide succeeding monarchs, is a method equally useful and much more modest. It afforded me a very singular pleasure that, when I wished to recite this panegyric in a private assembly, my friends gave me their company, though I did not solicit them in the usual form of notes or circulars, but only desired their attendance, should it be quite convenient to them, and, if they should happen to have no other engagement. You know the excuses generally made at Rome to avoid invitations of this kind, how prior invitations are usually alleged; yet in spite of the worst possible weather, they attended the recital for 2 days together, and when I thought it would be unreasonable to detain them any longer, they insisted upon my going through with it the next day. Shall I consider this as an honour done to myself or to literature? Rather let me suppose to the latter, which, though well nigh extinct, seems to be now again reviving amongst us. Yet what was the subject which raised this uncommon attention? No other than what formerly, even in the senate, where we had to submit to it, we used to grudge even a few moments' attention to. But now, you see, we have patience to recite and to attend to the same topic for 3 days together; and the reason of this is, not that we have more eloquent writing now than formerly, but we write under a fuller sense of individual freedom, and consequently more genially than we used to. It is an additional glory, therefore, to our present emperor that this sort of harangue, which was once as disgusting as it was false, is now as pleasing as it is sincere. But it was not only the earnest attention of my audience which afforded me pleasure; I was greatly delighted too with the justness of their taste; for I observed that the more nervous parts of my discourse gave them peculiar satisfaction. It is true, indeed, this work, which was written for the perusal of the world in general, was read only to a few; however, I would willingly look upon their particular judgment as an earnest of that of the public, and rejoice at their manly taste as if it were universally spread. It was just the same in eloquence as it was in music; the vitiated ears of the audience introduced a depraved style; but now, I am inclined to hope, as a more refined judgment prevails in the public, our compositions of both kinds will improve too. For those authors, whose sole object is to please, will fashion their works according to the popular taste. I trust, however, in subjects of this nature the florid style is most proper, and am so far from thinking that the vivid colouring I have used will be esteemed foreign and unnatural, that I am most apprehensive that censure will fall upon those parts where the diction is most simple and unornate. Nevertheless, I sincerely wish the time may come, and that it now were, when the smooth and luscious, which has affected our style, shall give place, as it ought, to severe and chaste composition. Thus have I given you an account of my doings of these last 3 days, that your absence might not entirely deprive you of a pleasure which, from your friendship to me, and the part you take in everything that concerns the interest of literature, I know you would have received, had you been there to hear. Farewell. XXXVI To Calvisius Rufus. I must have recourse to you, as usual, in an affair which concerns my finances. An estate adjoining my land, and indeed running into it, is for sale. There are several considerations strongly inclining me to this purchase, while there are others, no less weighty, deterring me from it. Its first recommendation is, the beauty which will result from uniting this farm to my own lands; next, the advantage as well as pleasure of being able to visit it without additional trouble and expense, to have it superintended by the same steward and almost by the same subagents, and to have one villa to support and embellish, the other just to keep in common repair. I take into this account furniture, housekeepers, fancy gardeners, artificers, and even hunting apparatus, as it makes a very great difference whether you get these all together into one place, or scatter them about in several. On the other hand, I don't know whether it is prudent to expose so large a property to the same climate, and the same risks of accident happening. To distribute one's possessions about seems a safer way of meeting the caprice of fortune; besides, there is something extremely pleasant in the change of air and place, and the going about between one's properties. And now, to come to the chief consideration. The lands are rich, fertile, and well watered, consisting chiefly of meadow ground, vineyard, and wood, while the supply of building timber and its returns, though moderate, still keep at the same rate. But the soil, fertile as it is, has been much impoverished by not having been properly looked after. The person last in possession used frequently to seize and sell the stock, by which means, although he lessened his tenants' arrears for the time being, yet he left them nothing to go on with, and the arrears ran up again in consequence. I shall be obliged, then, to provide them with slaves, which I must buy, and at a higher than the usual price, as these will be good ones; for I keep no fettered slaves myself, and there are none upon the estate. For the rest, the price, you must know, is 3 millions of sesterces. It has formerly gone over 5 millions, but owing partly to the general hardness of the times, and partly to its being thus stripped of tenants, the income of this estate is reduced, and consequently its value. You will be inclined perhaps to enquire whether I can easily raise the purchase money. My estate, it is true, is almost entirely in land, though I have some money out at interest; but I shall find no difficulty in borrowing any sum I may want. I can get it from my wife's mother, whose purse I may use with the same freedom as my own, so that you need not trouble yourself at all upon that point, should you have no other objections, which I should like you very carefully to consider; for, as in everything else, so, particularly in matters of economy, no man has more judgment and experience than yourself. Farewell. XXXVII To Cornelius Priscus. I have just heard of Valerius Martial's death, which gives me great concern. He was a man of an acute and lively genius, and his writings abound in equal wit, satire, and kindliness. On his leaving Rome I made him a present to defray his travelling expenses, which I gave him, not only as a testimony of friendship, but also in return for the verses with which he had complimented me. It was the custom of the ancients to distinguish those poets with honours or pecuniary rewards who had celebrated particular individuals or cities in their verses; but this good custom, along with every other fair and noble one, has grown out of fashion now, and in consequence of our having ceased to act laudably, we consider praise a folly and impertinence. You may perhaps be curious to see the verses which merited this acknowledgment from me, and I believe I can, from memory, partly satisfy your curiosity, without referring you to his works; but if you should be pleased with this specimen of them, you must turn to his poems for the rest. He addresses himself to his Muse, whom he directs to go to my house upon the Esquiline, but to approach it with respect. Go, wanton Muse, but go with care, nor meet, ill-timed, my Pliny's ear. He, by sage Minerva taught, gives the day to studious thought, and plans that eloquence divine, which shall to future ages shine, and rival wondrous Tully, thine. Then, cautious, watch the vacant hour, when Bacchus reigns in all his power, when crowned with rosy chaplets gay, Cato's might read my frolic lay. Do you not think that the poet who wrote of me in such terms deserved some friendly marks on my bounty then, and of my sorrow now? For he gave me the very best he had to bestow, and would have given more, had it been in his power; though indeed what can a man have conferred on him more valuable than the honour of never fading praise? But his poems will not long survive their author, at least I think not, though he wrote them in the expectation of their doing so. Farewell. XXXVIII To Fabatus, his wife's grandfather. You have long desired a visit from your granddaughter accompanied by me. Nothing, be assured, could be more agreeable to either of us, for we equally wish to see you, and are determined to delay that pleasure no longer. For this purpose we are already packing up, and hastening to you with all the speed the roads will permit of. We shall make only one, short, stoppage, for we intend turning a little out of our way to go into Tuscany, not for the sake of looking upon our estate, and into our family concerns, which we can postpone to another opportunity, but to perform an indispensable duty. There is a town near my estate, called Tifernum upon the Tiber, which, with more affection than wisdom, put itself under my patronage when I was yet a youth. These people celebrate my arrival among them, express the greatest concern when I leave them, and have public rejoicings whenever they hear of my preferments, by way of requiting their kindnesses. For what generous mind can bear to be excelled in acts of friendship? I have built a temple in this place, at my own expense, and as it is finished, it would be a sort of impiety to put off its dedication any longer. So we shall be there on the day on which that ceremony is to be performed, and I have resolved to celebrate it with a general feast. We may possibly stay on there for all the next day, but shall make so much the greater haste in our journey afterwards. May we have the happiness to find you and your daughter in good health. In good spirits I am sure we shall, should we get to you all safely. Farewell. XXXIX To Attius Clemens. Regulus has lost his son, the only undeserved misfortune which could have befallen him, in that I doubt whether he thinks it a misfortune. The boy had quick parts, but there was no telling how he might turn out. However, he seemed capable enough of going right, were he not to grow up like his father. Regulus gave him his freedom, in order to entitle him to the estate left him by his mother, and when he got into possession of it (I speak of the current rumours, based upon the character of the man), fawned upon the lad with a disgusting show of fond affection which in a parent was utterly out of place. You may hardly think this credible, but then consider what Regulus is. However, he now expresses his concern for the loss of this youth in a most extravagant manner. The boy had a number of ponies for riding and driving, dogs both big and little, together with nightingales, parrots, and blackbirds in abundance. All these Regulus slew round the funeral pyre. It was not grief, but an ostentatious parade of grief. He is visited upon this occasion by a surprising number of people, who all hate and detest the man, and yet are as assiduous in their attendance upon him as if they really esteemed and loved him. And to give you my opinion in a word, in endeavouring to do Regulus a kindness, make themselves exactly like him. He keeps himself in his park on the other side the Tiber, where he has covered a vast extent of ground with his porticos, and crowded all the shore with his statues; for he unites prodigality with excessive covetousness, and vainglory with the height of infamy. At this very unhealthy time of year he is boring society, and he feels pleasure and consolation in being a bore. He says he wishes to marry, a piece of perversity like all his other conduct. You must expect, therefore, to hear shortly of the marriage of this mourner, the marriage of this old man, too early in the former case, in the latter too late. You ask me why I conjecture this? Certainly not because he says so himself, for a greater liar never stepped, but because there is no doubt that Regulus will do whatever ought not to be done. Farewell. End of Section 6. Section 7 of Letters of Pliny by Pliny the Younger, translated by William Melmoth, revised by F.C.T. Bosanquet. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Andrew Coleman. Letters 40 to 49. Letter 40. To Catius Lepidus. I often tell you that there is a certain force of character about Regulus. It is wonderful how he carries through what he has set his mind to. He chose lately to be extremely concerned for the loss of his son. Accordingly he mourned for him as never man mourned before. He took it into his head to have an immense number of statues and pictures of him. Immediately all the artisans in Rome are set to work. Canvas, wax, brass, silver, gold, ivory, marble, all exhibit the figure of the young Regulus. Not long ago he read, before a numerous audience, a memoir of his son. A memoir of a mere boy. However, he read it. He wrote likewise a sort of circular letter to the several decurii, desiring them to choose out one of their order who had a strong clear voice, to read this eulogy to the people. It has been actually done. Now, had this force of character, or whatever else you may call a fixed determination in obtaining whatever one has a mind for, been rightly applied, what infinite good it might have effected! The misfortune is, there is less of this quality about good people than about bad people; and as ignorance begets rashness, and thoughtfulness produces deliberation, so modesty is apt to cripple the action of virtue, whilst confidence strengthens vice. Regulus is a case in point. He has a weak voice, an awkward delivery, an indistinct utterance, a slow imagination, and no memory. In a word, he possesses nothing but a sort of frantic energy, and yet, by the assistance of a flighty turn and much impudence, he passes as an orator. Herennius Senecio admirably reversed Cato's definition of an orator, and applied it to Regulus. An orator, he said, is a bad man, unskilled in the art of speaking. And really Cato's definition is not a more exact description of a true orator than Senecio's is of the character of this man. Would you make me a suitable return for this letter? Let me know if you, or any of my friends in your town, have, like a stroller in the market-place, read this doleful production of Regulus's, raising, as Demosthenes says, your voice most merrily, and straining every muscle in your throat. For so absurd a performance must excite laughter rather than compassion, and indeed the composition is as puerile as the subject. Farewell. XLI. To Maturius Sarianus. My advancement to the dignity of augur is an honour that justly indeed merits your congratulations, not only because it is highly honourable to receive, even in the slightest instances, a testimony of the approbation of so wise and discreet a prince, but because it is moreover an ancient and religious institution which has this sacred and peculiar privilege annexed to it, that it is for life. Other sacerdotal offices, though they may, perhaps, be almost equal to this one in dignity, yet as they are given, so they may be taken away again. But fortune has no further power over this than to bestow it. What recommends this dignity still more highly is, that I have the honour to succeed so illustrious a person as Julius Frontinus. He for many years, upon the nomination day of proper persons to be received into the sacred college, constantly proposed me, as though he had a view to electing me as his successor; and since it actually proves so in the event, I am willing to look upon it as something more than mere accident. But the circumstance, it seems, that most pleases you in this affair is that Cicero enjoyed the same post, and you rejoice, you tell me, to find that I follow his steps as closely in the path of honours as I endeavour to do in that of eloquence. I wish, indeed, that as I had the advantage of being admitted earlier into the same order of priesthood, and into the consular office, than Cicero, that so I might, in my later years, catch some spark, at least, of his divine genius. The former, indeed, being at man's disposal, may be conferred on me and on many others; but the latter it is as presumptuous to hope for as it is difficult to reach, being in the gift of Heaven alone. Farewell. XLII To Statius Sabinus. Your letter informs me that Sabina, who appointed you and me her heirs, though she has nowhere expressly directed that Modestus shall have his freedom, yet has left him a legacy in the following words: "I give, etc., to Modestus, whom I have ordered to have his freedom." Upon which you desire my opinion. I have consulted skilful lawyers upon the point, and they all agree Modestus is not entitled to his liberty, since it is not expressly given, and consequently that the legacy is void, as being bequeathed to a slave. But it evidently appears to be a mistake in the testatrix, and therefore I think we ought to act in this case as though Sabina had directed, in so many words, what, it is clear, she had ordered. I am persuaded you will go with me in this opinion, who so religiously regard the will of the deceased, which indeed, where it can be discovered, will always be law to honest heirs. Honour is to you and me as strong an obligation as the compulsion of law is to others. Let Modestus, then, enjoy his freedom and his legacy as fully as if Sabina had observed all the requisite forms, as indeed they effectually do who make a judicious choice of their heirs. Farewell. XLIII To Cornelius Minicianus. Have you heard? I suppose not yet, for the news has but just arrived, that Valerius Licinianus has become a professor in Sicily. This unfortunate person, who lately enjoyed the dignity of praetor, and was esteemed the most eloquent of our advocates, is now fallen from a senator to an exile, from an orator to a teacher of rhetoric. Accordingly, in his inaugural speech he uttered, sorrowfully and solemnly, the following words: "O Fortune, how capriciously dost thou sport with mankind! Thou makest rhetoricians of senators, and senators of rhetoricians." A sarcasm so poignant and full of gall that one might almost imagine he fixed upon this profession merely for the sake of an opportunity of applying it; and having made his first appearance in school clad in the Greek cloak, for exiles have no right to wear the toga, after arranging himself, and looking down upon his attire, "I am, however," he said, "going to declaim in Latin." You will think, perhaps, this situation, wretched and deplorable as it is what he well deserves for having stained the honourable profession of an orator with the crime of incest. It is true, indeed, he pleaded guilty to the charge; but whether from a consciousness of his guilt, or from an apprehension of worse consequences if he denied it, is not clear. For Domitian generally raged most furiously where his evidence failed him most hopelessly. That emperor had determined that Cornelia, chief of the Vestal Virgins, should be buried alive, from an extravagant notion that exemplary severities of this kind conferred lustre upon his reign. Accordingly, by virtue of his office as supreme pontiff, or rather in the exercise of a tyrant's cruelty, a despot's lawlessness, he convened the sacred college, not in the pontifical court where they usually assemble, but at his villa near Alba, and there, with a guilt no less heinous than that which he professed to be punishing, he condemned her, when she was not present to defend herself, on the charge of incest, while he himself had been guilty, not only of debauching his own brother's daughter, but was also accessory to her death. For that lady, being a widow, in order to conceal her shame, endeavoured to procure an abortion, and by that means lost her life. However, the priests were directed to see the sentence immediately executed upon Cornelia. As they were leading her to the place of execution, she called upon Vesta and the rest of the gods to attest her innocence, and amongst other exclamations frequently cried out, "Is it possible that Cæsar can think me polluted, under the influence of whose sacred functions he has conquered and triumphed?" Whether she said this in flattery or derision, whether it proceeded from a consciousness of her innocence or contempt of the emperor, is uncertain; but she continued exclaiming in this manner till she came to the place of execution, to which she was led, whether innocent or guilty I cannot say, at all events with every appearance and demonstration of innocence. As she was being lowered down into the subterranean vault, her robe happening to catch upon something in the descent, she turned round and disengaged it, when, the executioner offering his assistance, she drew herself back with horror, refusing to be so much as touched by him, as though it were a defilement to her pure and unspotted chastity, still preserving the appearance of sanctity up to the last moment, and among all the other instances of her modesty, she took great care to fall with decency. Celer likewise, a Roman knight, who was accused of an intrigue with her, while they were scourging him with rods in the forum, persisted in exclaiming, "What have I done? I have done nothing." These declarations of innocence had exasperated Domitian exceedingly, as imputing to him acts of cruelty and injustice. Accordingly, Licinianus, being seized by the emperor's orders for having concealed a freedwoman of Cornelia's in one of his estates, was advised, by those who took him in charge, to confess the fact, if he hoped to obtain a remission of his punishment. Circumstance to add further, that a young nobleman, having had his tunic torn, an ordinary occurrence in a crowd, stood with his gown thrown over him, to hear me, and that during the 7 hours I was speaking, whilst my success more than counterbalanced the fatigue of so long a speech. So let us set to, and not screen our own indolence under pretence of that of the public. Never, be very sure of that, will there be wanting hearers and readers, so long as we can only supply them with speakers and writers worth their attention. Farewell. Letter XLV. To Asinius. You advise me, nay, you entreat me, to undertake, in her absence, the cause of Corellia, against Caius Caecilius, consul elect. For your advice I am grateful; of your entreaty I really must complain. Without the first, indeed, I should have been ignorant of this affair, but the last was unnecessary, as I need no solicitations to comply, where it would be ungenerous in me to refuse. For can I hesitate a moment to take upon myself the protection of a daughter of Corellius? It is true, indeed, though there is no particular intimacy between her adversary and myself, still we are upon good enough terms. It is also true that he is a person of rank, and one who has a high claim upon my especial regard, as destined to enter upon an office which I have had the honour to fill, And it is natural for a man to be desirous those dignities should be held in the highest esteem which he himself once possessed. Yet all these considerations appear indifferent and trifling, when I reflect that it is the daughter of Corellius whom I am to defend, the memory of that excellent person, than whom this age has not produced a man of greater dignity, rectitude, and acuteness, is indelibly imprinted upon my mind. My regard for him sprang from my admiration of the man, and contrary to what is usually the case, my admiration increased upon a thorough knowledge of him, and indeed I did know him thoroughly, for he kept nothing back from me, whether gay or serious, sad or joyous. When he was but a youth, he esteemed, and, I will even venture to say, revered me as if I had been his equal. When I solicited any post of honour, he supported me with his interest, and recommended me with his testimony. When I entered upon it, he was my introducer and my companion; when I exercised it, he was my guide and my counsellor. In a word, whenever my interest was concerned, he exerted himself, in spite of his weakness and declining years, with as much alacrity as though he was still young and lusty. In private, in public, and at court, how often has he advanced and supported my credit and interest! It happened once that the conversation, in the presence of the Emperor Nerva, turned upon the promising young men of that time, and several of the company present were pleased to mention me with applause. He sat for a little while silent, which gave what he said the greater weight, and then, with that air of dignity to which you are no stranger, "I must be reserved," said he, "in my praises of Pliny, because he does nothing without advice;" by which single sentence he bestowed upon me more than my most extravagant wishes could aspire to, as he represented my conduct to be always such as wisdom must approve, since it was wholly under the direction of one of the wisest of men. Even in his last moments he said to his daughter, as she often mentions, "I have, in the course of a long life, raised up many friends to you, but there are none in whom you may more assuredly confide than Pliny and Cornutus," a circumstance I cannot reflect upon without being deeply sensible how incumbent it is upon me to endeavour not to disappoint the confidence so excellent a judge of human nature reposed in me. I shall therefore most readily give my assistance to Corellia in this affair, and willingly risk any displeasure I may incur by appearing in her behalf; though I should imagine, if in the course of my pleadings I should find an opportunity to explain and enforce more fully and at large than the limits of a letter allow of, the reasons I have here mentioned, upon which I rest at once my apology and my glory, her adversary, whose suit may perhaps, as you say, be entirely without precedent, as it is against a woman, will not only excuse, but approve my conduct. Farewell. XLVI To Hispulla. As you are a model of all virtue, and loved your late excellent brother, who had such a fondness for you, with an affection equal to his own, regarding too his daughter as your child, not only showing her an aunt's tenderness, but supplying the place of the parent she had lost, I know it will give you the greatest pleasure and joy to hear that she proves worthy of her father, her grandfather, and yourself. She possesses an excellent understanding, together with a consummate prudence, and gives the strongest evidence of the purity of her heart by her fondness of her husband. Her affection for me, moreover, has given her a taste for books; and my productions, which she takes a pleasure in reading, and even in getting by heart, are continually in her hands. How full of tender anxiety is she when I am going to speak in any case, how rejoiced she feels when it is got through! While I am pleading, she stations persons to inform her from time to time how I am heard, what applauses I receive, and what success attends the case. When I recite my works at any time, she conceals herself behind some curtain, and drinks in my praises with greedy ears. She sings my verses too, adapting them to her lyre, with no other master but Love, that best of instructors, for her guide. From these happy circumstances I derive my surest hopes that the harmony between us will increase with our days, and be as lasting as our lives. For it is not my youth or person, which time gradually impairs, it is my honour and glory that she cares for. But what less could be expected from one who was trained by your hands, and formed by your instructions, who was early familiarised under your roof with all that is pure and virtuous, and who learnt to love me first through your praises, and as you revered my mother with all the respect due even to a parent, so you kindly directed and encouraged my tender years, presaging from that early period all that my wife now fondly imagines I really am. Accept, therefore, of our mutual thanks, mine for your giving me her, hers for your giving her me, for you have chosen us out, as it were, for each other. Farewell. XLVII To Ramatius Fiasius. Look here, the next time the court sits, you must, at all events, take your place there. In vain would your indolence repose itself under my protection, for there is no absenting oneself with impunity. Look at that severe, determined praetor Licinius Nepos, who fined even a senator for the same neglect. The senator pleaded his cause in person, but in suppliant tone. The fine, it is true, was remitted, but sore was his dismay, humble his intercession, and he had to ask pardon. All praetors are not so severe as that. You will reply, you are mistaken. For though indeed to be the author and reviver of an example of this kind may be an act of severity, yet, once introduced, even lenity herself may follow the precedent. Farewell. XLVIII To Licinius Sura. I have brought you, as a little present out of the country, a query which well deserves the consideration of your extensive knowledge. There is a spring which rises in a neighbouring mountain, and running among the rocks is received into a little banqueting room, artificially formed for that purpose, from whence, after being detained a short time, it falls into the Larian lake. The nature of this spring is extremely curious. It ebbs and flows regularly 3 times a day. The increase and decrease is plainly visible, and exceedingly interesting to observe. You sit down by the side of the fountain, and while you are taking a repast and drinking its water, which is extremely cool, you see it gradually rise and fall. If you place a ring, or anything else at the bottom when it is dry, the water creeps gradually up, first gently washing, finally covering it entirely, and then, little by little, subsides again. If you wait long enough, you may see it thus alternately advance and recede 3 successive times. Shall we say that some secret current of air stops and opens the fountain-head, first rushing in and checking the flow, and then, driven back by the counter-resistance of the water, escaping again, as we see in bottles and other vessels of that nature, where, there not being a free and open passage, though you turn their necks perpendicularly or obliquely downwards, yet the outward air obstructing the vent, they discharge their contents, as it were, by starts? Or may not this small collection of water be successively contracted and enlarged upon the same principle as the ebb and flow of the sea? Or, again, as those rivers which discharge themselves into the sea, meeting with contrary winds and the swell of the ocean, are forced back in their channels, so in the same way may there not be something that checks this fountain for a time in its progress? Or is there rather a certain reservoir that contains these waters in the bowels of the earth, and while it is recruiting its discharges, the stream in consequence flows more slowly and in less quantity, but, when it has collected its due measure, runs on again in its usual strength and fullness? Or lastly, is there, I know not what kind of subterranean counterpoise, that throws up the water when the fountain is dry, and keeps it back when it is full? You, who are so well qualified for the enquiry, will examine into the causes of this wonderful phenomenon. It will be sufficient for me if I have given you an adequate description of it. Farewell. Letter XLIX. To Annius Severus. A small legacy was lately left me, yet one more acceptable than a far larger bequest would have been. How more acceptable than a far larger one? In this way. Pomponia Gratilla, having disinherited her son Assidius Curianus, appointed me one of her heirs, and Sertorius Severus, of praetorian rank, together with several eminent Roman knights, co-heirs along with me. The son applied to me to give him my share of the inheritance, in order to use my name as an example to the rest of the joint heirs, but offered at the same time to enter into a secret agreement to return me my proportion. I told him, it was by no means agreeable to my character to seem to act one way, while in reality I was acting another; besides, it was not quite honourable making presents to a man of his fortune, who had no children. In a word, this would not at all answer the purpose at which he was aiming, whereas, if I were to withdraw my claim, it might be of some service to him, and this I was ready and willing to do, if he could clearly prove to me that he was unjustly disinherited. Do then, he said, be my arbitrator in this case. After a short pause, I answered him, I will, for I don't see why I should not have as good an opinion of my own impartial disinterestedness as you seem to have. But, mind, I am not to be prevailed upon to decide the point in question against your mother, if it should appear she had just reason for what she has done. As you please, he replied, which I am sure is always to act according to justice. I called in as my assistants Corellius and Frontinus, two of the very best lawyers Rome at that time afforded. With these in attendance I heard the case in my own chamber. Curianus said everything which he thought would favour his pretensions, to whom, there being nobody but myself to defend the character of the deceased, I made a short reply, after which I retired with my friends to deliberate, and, being agreed upon our verdict, I said to him, Curianus, it is our opinion that your conduct has justly drawn upon you your mother's displeasure. Some time afterwards Curianus commenced a suit in the court of the 100 against all the co-heirs, except myself. The day appointed for the trial approaching, the rest of the co-heirs were anxious to compromise the affair and have done with it, not out of any diffidence of their cause, but from a distrust of the times. They were apprehensive of what had happened to many others happening to them, and that from a civil suit it might end in a criminal one, as there were some among them to whom the friendship of Gratilla and Rusticus might be extremely prejudicial. They therefore desired me to go and talk with Curianus. we met in the Temple of Concord. Now supposing, I said, your mother had left you the fourth part of her estate, or even suppose she had made you sole heir, but had exhausted so much of the estate in legacies that there would not be more than a fourth part remaining to you, could you justly complain? You ought to be content, therefore, if, being absolutely disinherited as you are, the heirs are willing to relinquish to you a fourth part, which, however, I will increase by contributing my proportion. You know you did not commence any suit against me, and 2 years have now elapsed, which gives me legal and indisputable possession. But to induce you to agree to the proposals on the part of the other co-heirs, and that you may be no sufferer by the peculiar respect you show me, I offer to advance my proportion with them. The silent approval of my own conscience is not the only result out of this transaction. It has contributed also to the honour of my character, for it is this same Curianus who has left me the legacy I have mentioned in the beginning of my letter, and I received it as a very notable mark of his approbation of my conduct, if I do not flatter myself. I have written and told you all this, because in all my joys and sorrows I am wont to look upon you as myself, and I thought it would be unkind not to communicate to so tender a friend whatever occasions me a sensible gratification. For I am not philosopher enough to be indifferent, when I think I have acted like an honourable man, whether my actions meet with that approval, which is in some sort their due. Farewell. End of Section 7. Section 8 of Letters of Pliny by Pliny the Younger, translated by William Melmoth, revised by F.C.T. Bosanquet. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Andrew Coleman. Letters 50 to 53. Letter 50. To Titius Aristo. Among the many agreeable and obliging instances I have received of your friendship, your not concealing from me the long conversations which lately took place at your house concerning my verses, and the various judgments passed upon them, which served to prolong the talk, is by no means the least. There were some, it seems, who did not disapprove of my poems in themselves, but at the same time censured me in a free and friendly way for employing myself in composing and reciting them. I am so far, however, from desiring to extenuate the charge, that I willingly acknowledge myself still more deserving of it, and confess that I sometimes amuse myself with writing verses of the gayer sort. I compose comedies, divert myself with pantomimes, read the lyric poets, and enter into the spirit of the most wanton muse. Besides that, I indulge myself sometimes in laughter, mirth, and frolic; and, to sum up every kind of innocent relaxation in one word, I am a man. I am not in the least offended, though, at their low opinion of my morals, and that those who are ignorant of the fact that the most learned, the wisest, and the best of men have employed themselves in the same way, should be surprised at the tone of my writings. But from those who know what noble and numerous examples I follow, I shall, I am confident, easily obtain permission to err with those whom it is an honour to imitate, not only in their most serious occupations, but their lightest triflings. Is it unbecoming me? I will not name any living example, lest I should seem to flatter, but is it unbecoming me to practise what became Tully, Calvus, Pollio, Messala, Hortensius, Brutus, Sulla, Catullus, Scaevola, Sulpicius, Varro, the Torquati, Memmius, Gatulicus, Seneca, Lucaeus, and, within our own memory, Virginius Rufus. But if the examples of private men are not sufficient to justify me, I can cite Julius Caesar, Augustus, Nerva, and Tiberius Caesar. I forbear to add Nero to the catalogue, though I am aware that what is practised by the worst of men does not therefore degenerate into wrong. On the contrary, it still maintains its credit, if frequently countenanced by the best. In that number, Virgil, Cornelius Nepos, and prior to these, Ennius and Attius justly deserve the most distinguished place. These last indeed were not senators, but goodness knows no distinction of rank or title. I recite my works, it is true, and in this instance I am not sure I can support myself by their examples. They, perhaps, might be satisfied with their own judgment, but I have too humble an opinion of mine to suppose my compositions perfect, because they appear so to my own mind. My reason then for reciting are, that, for one thing, there is a certain deference for one's audience, which excites a somewhat more vigorous application; and then again I have by this means an opportunity of settling any doubts I may have concerning my performance, by observing the general opinion of the audience. In a word, I have the advantage of receiving different hints from different persons; and although they should not declare their meaning in express terms, yet the expression of the countenance, the movement of the head, the eyes, the motion of a hand, a whisper, or even silence itself, will easily distinguish their real opinion from the language of politeness. And so if any one of my audience should have the curiosity to read over the same performance which he heard me read, he may find several things altered or omitted, and perhaps too upon his particular judgment, though he did not say a single word to me. But I am not defending my conduct in this particular, as if I had actually recited my works in public, and not in my own house before my friends, a numerous appearance of whom has upon many occasions been held an honour, but never, surely, a reproach. Farewell. LI To Nonius Maximus. I am deeply afflicted with the news I have received of the death of Fannius. In the first place, because I loved one so eloquent and refined; in the next, because I was accustomed to be guided by his judgment, and indeed he possessed great natural acuteness, improved by practice, rendering him able to see a thing in an instant. There are some circumstances about his death which aggravate my concern. He left behind him a will, which had been made a considerable time before his decease, by which it happens that his estate is fallen into the hands of those who had incurred his displeasure, whilst his greatest favourites are excluded. But what I particularly regret is, that he has left unfinished a very noble work in which he was employed. Notwithstanding his full practice at the bar, he had begun a history of those persons who were put to death or banished by Nero, and completed 3 books of it. They are written with great elegance and precision; the style is pure, and preserves a proper medium between the plain narrative and the historical; and as they were very favourably received by the public, he was the more desirous of being able to finish the rest. The hand of death is ever, in my opinion, too untimely and sudden when it falls upon such as are employed in some immortal work. The sons of sensuality, who have no outlook beyond the present hour, put an end every day to all motives for living; but those who look forward to posterity, and endeavour to transmit their names with honour to future generations by their works, to such death is always immature, as it still snatches them from amidst some unfinished design. Fannius, long before his death, had a presentiment of what has happened. He dreamed one night that as he was lying on his couch, in an undress, all ready for his work, and with his desk as usual in front of him, Nero entered, and placing himself by his side, took up the 3 first books of this history, which he read through, and then departed. This dream greatly alarmed him, and he regarded it as an intimation that he should not carry on his history any further than Nero had read, and so the event has proved. I cannot reflect upon this accident without lamenting that he was prevented from accomplishing a work which had cost him so many toilsome vigils, as it suggests to me, at the same time, reflections on my own mortality and the fate of my writings; and I am persuaded the same apprehensions alarm you for those in which you are at present employed. Let us then, my friend, while life permits, exert all our endeavours, that death, whenever it arrives, may find as little as possible to destroy. Farewell. LII To Domitius Apollinaris. The kind concern you expressed on hearing of my design to pass the summer at my villa in Tuscany, and your obliging endeavours to dissuade me from going to a place which you think unhealthy, are extremely pleasing to me. It is quite true indeed that the air of that part of Tuscany which lies towards the coast is thick and unwholesome, but my house stands at a good distance from the sea, under one of the Apennines, which are singularly healthy. But, to relieve you from all anxiety on my account, I will give you a description of the temperature of the climate, the situation of the country, and the beauty of my villa, which, I am persuaded, you will hear with as much pleasure as I shall take in giving it. The air in winter is sharp and frosty, so that myrtles, olives, and trees of that kind which delight in constant warmth will not flourish here. But the laurel thrives, and is remarkably beautiful, though now and then the cold kills it, though not oftener than it does in the neighbourhood of Rome. The summers are extraordinarily mild, and there is always a refreshing breeze, seldom high winds. This accounts for the number of old men we have about. You would see grandfathers and great-grandfathers of those now grown up to be young men, hear old stories and the dialect of our ancestors, and fancy yourself born in some former age, were you to come here. The character of the country is exceedingly beautiful. Picture to yourself an immense amphitheatre, such as nature only could create. Before you lies a broad, extended plain bounded by a range of mountains whose summits are covered with tall and ancient woods, which are stocked with all kinds of game. The descending slopes of the mountains are planted with underwood, among which are a number of little risings with a rich soil, on which hardly a stone is to be found. In fruitfulness they are quite equal to a valley, and though their harvest is rather later, their crops are just as good. At the foot of these, on the mountain side, the eye, wherever it turns, runs along one unbroken stretch of vineyards, terminated by a belt of shrubs. Next you have meadows and the open plain. The arable land is so stiff that it is necessary to go over it 9 times with the biggest oxen and the strongest ploughs. The meadows are bright with flowers, and produce trefoil and other kinds of herbage as fine and tender as if it were but just sprung up, for all the soil is refreshed by never-failing streams. But though there is plenty of water, there are no marshes, for the ground being on a slope, whatever water it receives without absorbing runs off into the Tiber. This river, which winds through the middle of the meadows, is navigable only in the winter and spring, at which seasons it transports the produce of the lands to Rome, but in summer it sinks below its banks, leaving the name of a great river to an almost empty channel. Towards the autumn, however, it begins again to renew its claim to that title. You would be charmed by taking a view of this country from the top of one of our neighbouring mountains, and would fancy that not a real, but some imaginary landscape, painted by the most exquisite pencil, lay before you. Such an harmonious variety of beautiful objects meets the eye, whichever way it turns. My house, although at the foot of a hill, commands as good a view as if it stood on its brow; yet you approach by so gentle and gradual a rise that you find yourself on high ground, without perceiving you have been making an ascent. Behind, but at a great distance, is the Apennine range. In the calmest days we get cool breezes from that quarter, not sharp and cutting at all, being spent and broken by the long distance they have travelled. The greater part of the house has a southern aspect, and seems to invite the afternoon sun in summer, but rather earlier in the winter, into a broad and proportionately long portico, consisting of several rooms, particularly a court of antique fashion. In front of the portico is a sort of terrace, edged with box and shrubs cut into different shapes. You descend from the terrace by an easy slope adorned with the figures of animals in box, facing each other, to a lawn overspread with the soft, I had almost said the liquid, acanthus. This is surrounded by a walk enclosed with evergreens, shaped into a variety of forms. Beyond it is the gestatio laid out in the form of a circus running round the multiform box hedge and the dwarf trees, which are cut quite close. The whole is fenced in with a wall completely covered by box, cut into steps all the way up to the top. On the outside of the wall lies a meadow that owes as many beauties to nature as all I have been describing within does to art, at the end of which are open plain and numerous other meadows and copses. From the extremity of the portico a large dining room runs out, opening upon one end of the terrace, while from the windows there is a very extensive view over the meadows up into the country, and from these you also see the terrace and the projecting wing of the house, together with the woods enclosing the adjacent hippodrome. Almost opposite the centre of the portico, and rather to the back, stands a summer house, enclosing a small area shaded by 4 plane trees, in the midst of which rises a marble fountain, which gently plays upon the roots of the plane trees, and upon the grass plots underneath them. This summer house has a bedroom in it, free from every sort of noise, and which the light itself cannot penetrate, together with a common dining room I use when I have none but intimate friends with me. A second portico looks upon this little area, and has the same view as the other I have just been describing. There is, besides, another room, which, being situate close to the nearest plane tree, enjoys a constant shade and green. Its sides are encrusted with carved marble up to the ceiling, while above the marble a foliage is painted with birds among the branches, which has an effect altogether as agreeable as that of the carving, at the foot of which a little fountain, playing through several small pipes into a vase it encloses, produces a most pleasing murmur. From a corner of the portico you enter a very large bedchamber opposite the large dining room, which from some of its windows has a view of the terrace, and from others of the meadow, as those in the front look upon a cascade which entertains at once both the eye and the ear, for the water, dashing from a great height, foams over the marble basin which receives it below. This room is extremely warm in winter, lying much exposed to the sun, and on a cloudy day the heat of an adjoining stove very well supplies his absence. Leaving this room, you pass through a good-sized, pleasant, undressing room into the cold bath-room, in which is a large gloomy bath; but if you incline to swim more at large or in warmer water, in the middle of the area stands a wide basin for that purpose, and near it a reservoir from which you may be supplied with cold water to brace yourself again, if you should find you are too much relaxed by the warm. Adjoining the cold bath is one of a medium degree of heat, which enjoys the kindly warmth of the sun, but not so intensely as the hot bath, which projects further. This last consists of 3 several compartments, each of different degrees of heat. The 2 former lie open to the full sun; the latter, though not much exposed to its heat, receives an equal share of its light. Over the undressing room is built the tennis court, which admits of different kinds of games and different sets of players. Not far from the baths is the staircase leading to the enclosed portico, 3 rooms intervening. One of these looks out upon the little area with the 4 plane trees round it, the other upon the meadows, and from the third you have a view of several vineyards, so that each has a different one, and looks towards a different point of the heavens. At the upper end of the enclosed portico, and indeed taken off from it, is a room that looks out upon the hippodrome, the vineyards, and the mountains. Adjoining is a room which has a fuller exposure to the sun, especially in winter, and out of which runs another connecting the hippodrome with the house. This forms the front. On the side rises an enclosed portico, which not only looks out upon the vineyards, but seems almost to touch them. From the middle of this portico you enter a dining room cooled by the wholesome breezes from the Apennine valleys. From the windows behind, which are extremely large, there is a close view of the vineyards, and from the folding doors through the summer portico. Along that side of the dining room, where there are no windows, runs a private staircase, for greater convenience in serving up when I give an entertainment. At the further end is a sleeping room, with a look out upon the vineyards, and, what is equally agreeable, the portico. Underneath this room is an enclosed portico resembling a grotto, which, enjoying in the midst of summer heats its own natural coolness, neither admits nor wants external air. After you have passed both these porticos, at the end of the dining room stands a third, which, according as the day is more or less advanced, serves either for winter or summer use. It leads to 2 different apartments, one containing 4 chambers, the other 3, which enjoy by turns both sun and shade. This arrangement of the different parts of my house is exceedingly pleasant, though it is not to be compared with the beauty of the hippodrome, lying entirely open in the middle of the grounds, so that the eye, upon your first entrance, takes it in entire in one view. It is set round with plane trees covered with ivy, so that while their tops flourish with their own green, towards the roots their verdure is borrowed from the ivy that twines round the trunk and branches, spreads from tree to tree, and connects them together. Between each plane tree are planted box trees, and behind these stands a grove of laurels which blend their shade with that of the planes. This straight boundary to the hippodrome alters its shape at the further end, bending into a semicircle, which is planted round, shut in with cypresses, and casts a deeper and gloomier shade, while the inner circular walks, for there are several, enjoying an open exposure, are filled with plenty of roses, and correct, by a very pleasant contrast, the coolness of the shade, with the warmth of the sun. Having passed through these several winding alleys, you enter a straight walk, which breaks out into a variety of others, partitioned off by box-row hedges. In one place you have a little meadow, in another the box is cut in 1,000 different forms, sometimes into letters, expressing the master's name, sometimes the artificer's, whilst here and there rise little obelisks with fruit trees alternately intermixed, and then on a sudden, in the midst of this elegant regularity, you are surprised with an imitation of the negligent beauties of rural nature. In the centre of this lies a spot adorned with a knot of dwarf plane trees. Beyond these stands an acacia, smooth and bending in places, then again various other shapes and names. At the upper end is an alcove of white marble, shaded with vines and supported by 4 small Carystian columns. From this semicircular couch the water, gushing up through several little pipes, as though pressed out by the weight of the persons who recline themselves upon it, falls into a stone cistern underneath, from whence it is received into a fine polished marble basin, so skilfully contrived that it is always full, without ever overflowing. When I sup here, this basin serves as a table, the larger sort of dishes being placed round the margin, while the smaller ones swim about in the form of vessels and waterfowl. Opposite this is a fountain which is incessantly emptying and filling, for the water which it throws up to a great height, falling back again into it, is by means of consecutive apertures returned as fast as it is received. Facing the alcove, and reflecting upon it as great an ornament as it borrows from it, stands a summer-house of exquisite marble, the doors of which project and open into a green enclosure, while from its upper and lower windows the eye falls upon a variety of different greens. Next to this is a little private closet, which, though it seems distinct, may form part of the same room. Furnished with a couch, and notwithstanding it has windows on every side, yet it enjoys a very agreeable gloom, by means of a spreading vine which climbs to the top, and entirely overshadows it. Here you may lie and fancy yourself in a wood, with this only difference, that you are not exposed to the weather as you would be there. Here too a fountain rises and instantly disappears. Several marble seats are set in different places, which are as pleasant as the summer house itself, after one is tired out with walking. Near each is a little fountain, and throughout the whole hippodrome several small rills run murmuring along through pipes, wherever the hand of art has thought proper to conduct them, watering here and there different plots of green, and sometimes all parts at once. I should have ended before now, for fear of being too chatty, had I not proposed in this letter to lead you into every corner of my house and gardens; nor did I apprehend your thinking it a trouble to read the description of a place which I feel sure would please you, were you to see it, especially as you can stop just when you please, and by throwing aside my letter, sit down as it were, and give yourself a rest as often as you think proper. Besides, I gave my little passion indulgence, for I have a passion for what I have built, or finished, myself. In a word, for why should I conceal from my friend either my deliberate opinion or my prejudice? I look upon it as the first duty of every writer to frequently glance over his title page, and consider well the subject he has proposed to himself, and he may be sure, if he dwells on his subject, he cannot justly be thought tedious, Whereas if, on the contrary, he introduces and drags in anything irrelevant, he will be thought exceedingly so. Homer, you know, has employed many verses in the description of the arms of Achilles, as Virgil has also in those of Aeneas, yet neither of them is prolix, because they each keep within the limits of their original design. Aratus, you observe, is not considered too circumstantial, though he traces and enumerates the minutest stars, for he does not go out of his way for that purpose, but only follows where his subject leads him. In the same way, to compare small things with great, so long as, in endeavouring to give you an idea of my house, I have not introduced anything irrelevant or superfluous, it is not my letter which describes, but my villa which is described, that is to be considered large. But to return to where I began, lest I should justly be condemned by my own law, if I continue longer in this digression, you see now the reasons why I prefer my Tuscan villa to those which I possess at Tusculum, Tiber, and Praeneste. Besides the advantages already mentioned, I enjoy here a cosier, more profound and undisturbed retirement than anywhere else, as I am at a greater distance from the business of the town and the interruption of troublesome clients. All is calm and composed, which circumstances contribute no less than its clear air and unclouded sky to that health of body and mind I particularly enjoy in this place, both of which I keep in full swing by study and hunting. And indeed there is no place which agrees better with my family. At least I am sure I have not yet lost one, may the expression be allowed, of all those I brought here with me. And may the gods continue that happiness to me, and that honour to my villa. Farewell. Letter LIII To Calvisius. It is certain the law does not allow a corporate city to inherit any estate by will, or to receive a legacy. Saturninus, however, who has appointed me his heir, had left a fourth part of his estate to our corporation of Comum. Afterwards, instead of a fourth part, he bequeathed 400,000 sesterces. This bequest, in the eye of the law, is null and void, but, considered as the clear and express will of the deceased, ought to stand firm and valid. Myself, I consider the will of the dead, though I am afraid what I say will not please the lawyers, of higher authority than the law, especially when the interest of one's native country is concerned. Ought I, who made them a present of 1,100,000 sesterces out of my own patrimony, to withhold a benefaction of little more than a third part of that sum, out of an estate which has come quite by a chance into my hands? You, who like a true patriot have the same affection for this our common country, will agree with me in opinion, I feel sure. I wish therefore you would, at the next meeting of the Decurii, acquaint them, just briefly and respectfully, as to how the law stands in this case, and then add that I offer them 400,000 sesterces, according to the direction in Saturninus's will. You will represent this donation as his present and his liberality. I only claim the merit of complying with his request. I did not trouble to write to their senate about this, fully relying as I do upon our intimate friendship and your wise discretion, and being quite satisfied that you are both able and willing to act for me upon this occasion as I would for myself. Besides, I was afraid I should not seem to have so cautiously guarded my expressions in a letter as you will be able to do in a speech. The countenance, the gesture, and even the tone of voice govern and determine the sense of the speaker; whereas a letter, being without these advantages, is more liable to malignant misinterpretation. Farewell. End of section 8.